So blockchain is a really interesting topic. Uh, I mean, this is something that I've been also following. I've actually done a research report on it. Um, just a sort of quick survey, how many people have heard about blockchain, firstly? OK, that's great. So they've heard. How many people really understand what blockchain is? Oh, great. OK, that's better than I expected. So I guess the plan for the panel today is to, one, maybe just uncover a bit of the blockchain, what exactly is, what does it mean? What does it mean for the auto industry? What specific use cases can we actually see for blockchain? I mean, unlike AI, which you're actually seeing a lot of trial and real deployment, blockchain is a little bit more further away in terms of timelines. So I guess you have to sort of think a bit further on and how this is all going to sort of roll out in terms of adoption. And then sort of we take a sort of deeper dive into some of these use cases, the challenges. If you are an OEM, you want to get your hands dirty, I guess, where do you start? So those are some of the things that I want to sort of unpack. Before that, maybe just have the panel just introduce themselves just quickly.
Yeah, hi, my name is Irvin Watkins. I'm the CEO and founder of Dovu. We're a blockchain business. We generated our own crypto token, and our aim is to be the token of reward, really, within the mobility and transport sector. So I can cover that a little bit in more detail, maybe, through the conversation.
I'm Roland Haring. I'm Client Technical Advisor with IBM for automotive. I've been serving the automotive market for about 15 years, and for the last 5 years I've been focused more on connected vehicle, cloud, and blockchain technologies.
OK, can you just speak a little bit more? Maybe it wasn't being heard.
Okay.
Yeah, great. So I guess to start off, who wants to take on the definition question? How do you explain this to a layperson?
Okay.
Roland?
Yes, sure. So yeah, it's a typical question. So what is actually blockchain? How do you explain it? I like to think about blockchain as a new internet. So think of what internet has done for the exchange of information between organizations since its inception. So similarly, blockchain promises to be the revolutionizing technology for business transactions on the internet, providing secure and exchange between businesses. Yeah, so blockchain is based on a distributed ledger. You distribute control to the business network that is actually doing this business transaction. If you think today, there are many intermediaries that are doing quite a lot of money just by providing more trust and more security to these business transactions. So with blockchain, you are pushing that security and that trust into the technology. And so many of the intermediaries will struggle to provide the value when you have blockchain there. So transactions will be much faster, will be much cheaper. So I think there is a lot of promise behind blockchain and what it can do to business transactions, as what you have seen internet has done for the information flow between organizations. I think that's the easiest way to explain blockchain, in my view.
Irfan, you want to add anything to that?
Not technically, no. I mean, for me, we apply the sort of tokenization really onto the blockchain. So it's an element of blockchain is as Roland has said, is fantastic for sort of business transformation, removing cost where there's a cost element there just for trust. It's a phenomenal sort of system for that. It's also a fantastic ledger for adding a cryptocurrency to it. And I know blockchain is synonymous with Bitcoin, but if you remove Bitcoin as a sort of whole separate beast, really, the sort of tokenization of reward structured to distributed ledger opens up some fantastic sort of business opportunities for everybody who sort of gets involved.
Wait, so So moving on to sort of automotive and blockchain. So why is automotive a good vertical for blockchain? I mean, there are lots of other verticals. For example, financial is kind of actually one of the early adopters for blockchain. And there are some key specific reasons for that. I mean, there's a lot of, there's inefficiencies, there's cost savings that you can do, there's the highly regulated structures. Roland, do you want to sort of take that one in terms of why you see automotive as a good fit for blockchain? I know that you also work in other verticals, so maybe you can provide a good perspective on this.
Yes, sure. So yes, as you say, IBM is involved in many different verticals. According to Markets and Markets recent study, automotive is among the 5 top verticals adopting blockchain currently. But I think that actually shadows the importance of automotive in blockchain adoption. Many markets are being created cross-industry nowadays, and automotive is an essential part in many of these use cases that you see coming up, like mobility services in supply chain. So I think although blockchain is automotive is not the top vertical, so it started with banking and financial services, also health and life sciences are an industry, a vertical that is adopting blockchain quite fast. Automotive plays a central role in many of the new data-driven business models that are being created cross-industry. Oh, would you like to add something to that?
No, thanks. I agree with that. I'm really excited about blockchain and tokenization within the sort of auto industry. You know, we've heard OEMs stand on the stage today talking about open APIs, data being sold to third parties, the driver's been rewarded for that sort of data. So new models coming out when the car is the platform. And you know, if you are going to do that and you want sort of reward structures put alongside that, you know, blockchain linked to tokens is for us is a phenomenal opportunity, but not just for us, just for the whole sort of marketplace. So look, if you want to reward somebody for doing something, if you want to create some sort of nudge economics, or some sort of structured process to drive people to, excuse the pun, drive people to certain sort of tasks and certain routes, then tokenization is a great way of doing that. And then that linked to the blockchain can open up a whole range of new opportunities. So things like car sharing, you know, all sorts of areas like that where you want to get paid for doing something, you want to encourage someone to do something, applying a business model, a token of reward, you know, and a blockchain for validation and a ledger that something has actually happened, linked to smart contracts, which is sort of an evolution of the blockchain a little bit, sort of creates fantastic new revenue opportunities, but also great reward systems for the drivers.
So yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Perhaps I would like to add also to that, that what we see in the adoption rate, that there is a growth of more than 50% within the top 5 verticals adopting blockchain, which I find quite surprising. So 50% a year of growth in volumes with blockchain adoption.
And within automotive?
Automotive is also above 50%.
Okay, that's great.
Yearly growth, yes.
That's great. It's interesting. So it's great. I just wanted to say that it's good to have panelists who basically are representing 2 different domains of blockchain. One is sort of public blockchain, Irfan sort of doing more of the public blockchain implementation, and then Roland doing sort of more of the private blockchain. So I'll let them sort of explain that a little bit more. And maybe we can take that in the next question, which is basically, and we touched upon it in terms of the use cases. What sort of use cases have you worked on? And maybe if you can sort of put a lens of sort of short term and maybe more long term, you know, what sort of use cases can we expect in the auto industry, just based on your own experience?
Yes, sure. So yes, as you said, there are 2 main domains of blockchain. One is public blockchains, which are permissionless. Usually they are anonymous, so people participating in these blockchains do not provide an identity and they don't know how big the network of participating entities is. And then there is the other domain, which is newer, and for which there is this open source Hyperledger project with more than 130 participating companies, organizations behind, and driven by the Linux Foundation, which is more oriented to blockchain for business, the way they call it, which is more oriented to private blockchains. So blockchain of known participants, usually businesses. You have between 10 and 20 in average of participating entities in this network. And there are some differences, of course, in use cases. Some use cases are better solved with public blockchain technology. Some use cases are better solved with private blockchain technology. So what makes actually a good use case for blockchain? Well, first, you need to have a business problem to be solved. It sounds quite trivial, but I think the important part there is business. So you need to create value when you bring in this new solution, value to every participating entity in this business network. The second one is the business network itself. You need to have an identified business network of people participating there. And the last quality that makes a good use case for blockchain is you need to have a need for trust and or transparency that you want to solve with this blockchain technology. What we see in the automotive market of, I would call them meta use cases, because behind these meta use cases you have very different use cases that are being addressed and implemented also already. One of the meta use cases is within mobility services. You might have read in the press the engagement that we are doing with ZF and with UBS around car e-wallet. So an e-wallet in the car that pays for mobility services, that pays for, let's say, parking, for charging, that receives money if it lends its electric charging capacity to the grid, to the power grid. It also receives money if it's involved in some sort of carpooling, car sharing. So you have an e-wallet that allows the car itself to be paying by itself and not burdening the user of the car, because usually in many cases the user is not the owner of taking out his own credit card and paying for these services, gas, power, or what have you. So mobility services, there is a huge area there with different use cases, also identity and personalization, where a given user can store its profile, its personalization in the cloud, in the blockchain, and provide it as needed, so that a car that he jumps in car sharing, for example, can quickly get the profile of him and personalization of him, so that it is configured and knows what are his preferences. So that's mobility services meta use case. Then there is also a use case for supply chain, also for digital twin. Digital twin, there is the concept of having relevant and important transactions of a car being recorded in a distributed ledger throughout its lifetime. When it starts during production of the vehicle, during assembly, you record every transaction also across the supply chain, for physical parts as well as for software parts, and the software part is actually becoming more and more relevant. And then in the after sales, you keep track of relevant transactions like maintenance and services that you are providing to the car, if it changes ownership, how it is being used. And some of the use cases that you can see behind this digital twin is when you have a recall service. It's much faster and easier to find affected vehicles and affected users. When you have warranty cases, it's also much easier to find who needs to really take the burden of the costs of a recall or a warranty case. So there are many use cases behind this digital twin.
So can we take maybe a few
Yes,
of the public, which is very, very sort of different. I mean, it looks like it's more around tokenization or is it beyond tokenization as well?
Well, I mean, for me, well, you look at blockchain, and the first thing you look for a project is who don't I trust? There's somebody in this equation I don't trust. So public blockchain is great for that. We're going to get sort of it ledgered in the public. So there may be an example from a consumer perspective where they don't trust anybody in the private blockchain, whether that's their mistrust of the corporation, the mistrust of the bank, their mistrust of whatever else that's sort of involved in there. I think public blockchain is there really to sort of take trust away from banks and governments, and that's where it's come from really. And then it gets applied in a private way, totally understandable, because I think the only way you're going to get corporates to adopt that is to have private chains. But the public aspect is different. Going forward, there's going to be sort of middleware that will straddle the private and public chains. For us, in terms of the tokenization of that, it's basically saying, look, we want if I'm earning a reward for something that I do, I want that ledgered outside of a garden wall, out of a walled environment. I've done something and I want it ledgered outside. If I actually own my data, I may want to choose who I sell that data to and at what price, so you can sort of see a data market coming up. So the public chain is different. It has a different sort of model, and sometimes it's effective, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's worth doing. But really, the tokenization to the consumer and allowing the consumer the choice as to their reward system that they want to use for that, for what they've sort of delivered, makes the public chain very effective in that regard. So in other words, who don't I trust? I don't need to trust anybody because I'll trust the ledger.
So at some point, the two chains have to talk to each other. We were discussing it earlier. I guess there are already some initiatives which are in place, which are trying to bridge these two domains, right?
Yeah, because within the corporation, within the closed blockchain, there are going to be events and transactions going on that are proprietary and need to be closed. However, outside of that, the reward structure, the token structure, doesn't necessarily need to be closed in that same way. So you can actually deliver the value that the private blockchain delivers, but create a smart contract, create a simple rule that states, if I do this, I get that. And then just ledger that, and that sits in parallel really to the other activities that are going on within the chain.
Can you just explain that in terms of the end user experience? Like, for example, like toll booths, you gain tokens, and then you can sort of trade it for, say, fiat currency. I don't know what else.
Yeah. So specifically Ethereum. So Ethereum is a blockchain that has gained a lot of traction because it's got a token, but also it has a thing called a smart contract, which is just a simple logic-based contract, really. If this, then that. So, as an example, if I wanted to share a car, one of you guys may send me a code to my phone, a 4-digit code that unlocks the car, and I get in it. by tapping in that code into your car, it triggers a smart contract. That smart contract triggers a transaction. You get paid immediately because there's no banks to go through, so the value gets straight into your wallet. The contract's triggered, therefore the insurance is triggered, and then you drive the car. And then when you get out of the car, you tap in the code again, and you leave the car. That smart contract triggers again. That states, right, okay, contract is done. You walk away. Deal finished. That's a real world example of how you can use a ledger, a token, and a contract to remove the need for you physically to be there to hand over the keys, remove the need for you to be there with a contract for somebody to sign. It creates a frictionless, trusted, sort of seamless way of transacting and legally, conducting business.
So if you are an OEM, and there's so many, I mean, there's multiple platforms here. There's Hyperledger, there's Ethereum, there's others. How do you decide what is suited for yourself? I mean, I guess you have different views on that, but
Yeah, so that's
what's good for the OEM?
Yeah, that's not so an easy question. So when you think of public blockchain, you usually think about Ethereum. So it's the same underlying technology that brought up Bitcoin. When you think about private blockchains, you think about Hyperledger. That's Linux Foundation open source project. With private blockchain, you usually have a network of 10 to 20 participants in the network. So when you address a use case and you see that the use case needs to have every network participant identifiable. So when you do supply chain, you want to know who's really recording transactions in the blockchain. Or when you do over-the-air updates, you want to know who is the company that is actually behind either a map or a point of interest or some update to the operating system of the head unit or the head unit provider. You want to know who is actually validating a given transaction. So in that case, private blockchain is probably a good fit. When you're thinking about use cases where you have a mass of users that don't want to give up their identity, but they want to participate in secure business transaction, you're probably thinking more on the lines of public blockchains. So public blockchains are open to everyone. You don't need a specific permission to enter the blockchain as you do in private blockchains, but it's not so, the selection criteria, this is very rough what I just explained. Usually we do in garages, we do workshops to identify a use case and see what kind of technology might be best fit for that technology, if it's private or public blockchain. Would you like to add
So it looks like if it's like an internal function like supply chain, or you're trying to track parts within a system, you basically use a public blockchain. But if it's like a consumer-facing service, where you're trying to enable, say, payments on a toll road, possibly you go for a public one, or is that?
That's sort of the way I see the very rough identification of use cases and fits for the different technologies. Yeah.
Okay, so in sort of summary, what would be your advice? I mean, let's just take a long-term view, maybe to end this discussion with. Where do we see blockchain in, say 5 years in the auto industry? What's sort of realistic in terms of what sort of services will be enabled? You think, Irfan, you want to go first?
I think what it does, it enables new business models. It enables, as I say, I just use one use case there of the simplicity of sharing a car and the simplicity of conducting a transaction. If you apply what's happening in the financial world in terms of what crypto and Bitcoin and blockchain's doing, apply that to your customers, enable them to participate in that crypto frictionless, borderless world, and that opens up new models for transport. The ability to earn rewards for certain types of behavior and then use what you've earned to pay for other services or solutions. So, you know, you rode a bike for 2 hours. Well, you've earned a certain reward there. And then you can use that reward to hire a car for an hour, or to, you know, jump on a train, or whatever that is. So you've got or even trade it for something completely different, because it's a token. You can trade it for, you know, a discount off your Starbucks coffee, or whatever that is. It's just a token that has a value that can be transferred. So if you think of something like Avios points, or any sort of reward-based scheme that sits in a retail industry, apply that, but on a global scale, which is completely transferable and tradable between everybody that wants to participate. That, when you start thinking in that way, then you can start thinking of new ways of rewarding behavior and new business models around mobility and transport, which of course the auto industry has a role to play in that.
So it fits very well with sort of some of the sort of forward-looking presentations we've seen today, like mobility as a service, where, you know, you can enable multiple different business models, where also lots of sort of collaborations between you know, different you know, players in the market. I guess ride sharing, with carpooling, with, I mean, there's so many different ways you can slice and dice.
I think the mobility as a service, this idea that you can, you know, if I was controlling a municipality and I wanted to create some nudge economics and sort of changes in behavior, and you wanted a reward-based structure around that, then the tokenization of reward is a great way of doing it. So, you know, as I say, you get more points if you're on a bike as opposed to in a car. You get more points if you're on public transport, whatever that is. However you wanted to structure things, you could do that as long as you had a token that had some value that was distributed around, and that when that token was used, it was ledgered, trusted, and that ledger was publicly available. So, you know, it just removed the need for anybody to worry about the trust.
Great. So we have about 3 minutes left. Maybe we'll just open it up to questions. I don't know if there's anything on Slido.
You have quite a lot, actually. You have quite a few.
Okay, great. So we possibly take a few.
One of them I want the answer to as well.
Okay. So blockchain removes the cost of trust, however, few trust Bitcoin. I guess are you replacing the cost of trust with a lack of trust?
I can cover that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd agree with that. That's the first thing I'd say. I think that you've got to separate blockchain from Bitcoin without a doubt. Bitcoin is a store of value, and its recent ride to the $7,000 a coin right now. So it depends what angle you're coming at it from trust with, really. I would put a lot of trust into it if I bought Bitcoin at sort of 10 cents and it's $7,000 now. There'd be a lot of trust built in that. But I think it's separating out Bitcoin from, and removing the idea of Bitcoin being the sort of dark web and the history of where Bitcoins come from. You know, those days are long gone. So separate Bitcoin from blockchain, because yes, you need blockchain for Bitcoin, but you don't need Bitcoin for blockchain.
So the next question is, I think, Roland, you can possibly take that one on how will blockchain impact how OEMs work with suppliers? So does that fit into the supply chain?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So the same way we are using actually blockchain internally within IBM for supply chain, and we have seen that it does not affect or impact the work with the suppliers that we also have, but it expedites many of the processes that are involved in supply chain. We do customs clearance, for example, and that is much faster doing with blockchain than doing it the usual way, paperwork. And we also see that you will be reducing a lot of costs when working with your suppliers if you use blockchain. One of the examples is also the software logistics. For providing a final product with a lot of software into a vehicle, you need to develop in parallel, and the bits and pieces that come together at the end, they are of course related to one another. So sometimes you run tests, and those tests you run on outdated versions, but you don't know that until later. And if you later realize that some of the other software development streams deprecated one of the versions, then you would need to redo all those regression tests, increasing a lot the cost of production and the cost of testing and quality assurance. So blockchain has the potential to reduce costs in development, to make many of the business processes more transparent through this distributed ledger, making many of the processes faster, and so it will only improve, I think, the current business processes, and it will allow many new business processes with the suppliers in the supply chain.
Okay, looks like we've run out of time. I see there are a few more questions, but the panelists should be around. I don't know if you have to go catch flights but I'm sure they'll be around to answer questions. I think with that, we'll sort of call an end to it. Thank you so much to the panelists. Just give a big hand.